everybody, and thank you so much for being there. I have to say, there's a very, very high number of registrations today in this session. I know the topic is really, really interesting, shaping the new world of work. So you have a hot topic here between your hands, Antonio, Valerio. I have to welcome everybody to this new session within the Leading in Complex Times Dialogue Series, which is an initiative that IE has put in place with the only aim of sharing knowledge and expertise from our professors in such moments as these. We are very lucky to have Antonio and Valerio here with us today. Antonio is professor at IE Law School, and Valerio De Stefano is a Beaux-Arts professor of labor law in KU Leuven, Belgium. Okay, so they're going to have a conversation on regulation and the future work. They will have their conversation first, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Okay, so at the end of the session, the audience can write the questions on the chat, and Valerio and Antonio will address them. Okay. So thank you again. And now, Antonio, Valerio, the arena is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for both of us, I can say. We're going to have this informal conversation, actually. It's not even a presentation. The title, as you can see, is rather ambitious: Regulation and the Future of Work, the Employment Relationship as Innovation Facilitator. I'm very happy for two main reasons. The first one is that I can share this space with Valerio, who is a close friend of mine, not only a colleague, but also the supervisor of my doctoral dissertation, and in general my mentor. At the same time, I guess that this is the very first time when we have the opportunity to present the key topics of this article that has been recently published by the International Labour Review, which is a journal edited by the International Labour Office. We spent a lot of time on this article, and actually we try to answer some challenges posed by the ongoing digital transformation of the labor market. And we insist that some social institutions are suitable and flexible enough to accommodate new organizational templates that are now currently implemented by modern and even disruptive businesses, whatever it means. But before entering into the legal domain, we can start with a story, with a simple anecdote. And actually, Valerio, some months ago, sent me a link to a very interesting podcast, and actually there was also a blog post describing the successful story of this family business, the Gaia Winemaker production. Now, actually, if you Google it, you may easily understand that one bottle of Barbaresco, who is the, let's say, flagship wine of the company, can even cost no less than 400 euros. So this is a wonderful firm which is doing a terrific job in the wine market. But in this podcast, there is Angelo, who is the actual CEO, the boss of the company, who tells a story about his father, Giovanni, who is here on the slide. And over there, you can also see the village of Barbaresco in the district of the Langhe, which is another wonderful area very close to the Northern Alps in the region of Piedmont in Italy. Now, the story goes that Giovanni was totally obsessed with the idea of creating a very high quality Barbaresco. So he spent a lot of time in the vineyard getting rid of the low quality grapes. The idea again was to improve the quality of the wine by collecting very high quality grapes and by experimenting and testing new techniques in the winemaking process. Of course, there was a kind of conflict of interest between the landowner, Giovanni, and the so-called mezzadri, the sharecroppers, who used to tend the land which was owned by Giovanni. Actually, mezzadri, the sharecroppers, were paid on the basis of the harvest, on the quantity of grapes collected. Actually, this kind of misalignment of the interest was in theory detrimental because they were looking for the more the better in terms of grapes, while on the other side, Giovanni actually wanted to improve the quality also by accepting the idea of destroying part of the harvest. So to solve this kind of dilemma, Giovanni took a very unprecedented decision from a business point of view, because Giovanni decided to hire a large number of sharecroppers as employees for two main reasons. The first one, just in order to avoid the fact that they were worried about the harvest. But the second one is even more important for the purposes of the arguments that we intend to develop in this conversation. He wanted to hire them as waged employees in order to be able to issue orders, guidelines, in order to be able to organize the production in a very efficient way. And this is why they had to follow the orders and also to tolerate a boss who was thought to be crazy, even though he was a very brilliant innovator. So actually, we have spent almost 2 months of self-isolation, but I can assure that we're not crazy. And this story, this anecdote is instrumental for making the legal argument that we want to share with you tonight. This story actually is a very clear example of what labor lawyers call mutualization of risk, integration of the local supply chain, but also support for innovation and investment in a long-term relationship, also resulting in the improvement of firm-specific skills. And this is somehow very relevant also for today's labor market. We are witnessing very important developments, new companies that are trying to develop disruptive business model. But here the crucial point is that flexibility is embedded in the standard employment relationship. At the same time, social institutions have been responsible for the development of the modern enterprise. So if the goal is to put in place, to design a business that is capable of being successful, we should resort to some social institution that we're going to describe in this conversation. Now, there is an important issue that we need to underline. At the moment, some players in the labor market, but more broadly in the digital society, we could say, are claiming that social institutions are obsolete because they are too rigid, they are too old, they are a relic of the past. They have been conceived in a totally different world, in the pre-digital era. So of course they are there. We had to avoid that they somehow kill innovation. Now, here there is an important problem that is about the conception and also the way in which we conceive flexibility. There are two main categories of flexibility. What we call external flexibility, that is the possibility of hiring and firing workers in a very smooth way, just in order to adapt the business to the needs and also to the fluctuations of the market. On the other side, a rather neglected dimension of flexibility is what labor lawyers call functional flexibility, or even internal flexibility, which is the ability for the employer to redeploy a worker from a duty to another one, actually even to change the task for which a worker has been hired. And we argue that this specific function of flexibility and the specific role of internal flexibility is crucial when it comes to designing a flexible and innovative business model. This is the proposal that we intend to make, and these are the two research questions that we would like to answer today. Of course, you can also go and search for the article, which has been translated also in French and Spanish. But these are the, let's say, starting point of this exploration of the foundational role of social institution. The first question is, are current labor regulation and institutions still appropriate to cope with the future of work, whatever it means? There is lots of confusion surrounding this very tantalizing and fascinating definition. The second question is the employment relationship obsolete and incapable to offer flexible tools to the modern enterprise, to these new businesses that are trying to redesign the company and even the workplace? This is the structure of the conversation. So we're going to discuss a bit about a topic that is very familiar for many of us nowadays, which is platform work, but we will try also to discuss about two other phenomena that are the vertical disintegration of the firm and the so-called fissurization of the workplace. Then we will try to unpack the foundational role of labor law and social institution by adopting the so-called transaction cost economics approach. And then we will conclude with the kind of alternative solution in a time when both employers and employees are craving for more autonomy, discretion, and of course, genuine flexibility. When it comes to digital transformation, as I said before, there is a very pervasive conversation all over the world on the role of these new intermediaries that are somehow putting social institutions under pressure. You may be familiar with the large number of litigation and lawsuits taking place all over the world, in particular related to the legal status of workers, but also with the definition of the relevant market in which some companies are operating. Now, Valerio and I have been studying this topic for many years now, and we have two key takeaways, I would say. The first one is about the role of technology, and we are going to investigate a bit more in detail the specific function of the digital infrastructure. But for a moment, let's say that the goal of the matching infrastructure could be a platform, a smartphone, an app, or whatever, is to reduce and to lower transaction costs. Transaction costs are, roughly speaking, the cost incurred for obtaining information, setting a price, negotiating terms and conditions, and then enforcing the contract and also assessing the compliance of the other party. This is the role of technology, lowering transaction costs and as a result making the intermediation of not only items but also labor more convenient. On the other side, we have a crucial problem that was totally ignored some years ago, which is now gaining importance thanks to the contribution of many scholars, some decisions before courts and tribunals. Now, the crucial problem here is that the competitive advantage gained by many platforms is due to the, I would say, selective or partial application of labor law. And this can be rather detrimental. Actually, we are witnessing at the moment, also because of the ongoing health crisis, that relying on precarious forms of employment can be problematic, also in terms of the impacts on society.
And I think to basically sum it up, what we have said so far to get ahead, but what Antonio has explained so far is that when we talk about labor regulation, there is a mainstream approach that sees labor regulation as just a protective tool for workers. So when you talk about employment and labor regulation, people only think of, let's say, the minimum wages or dismissal protection or working time protection, all these kind of protections that are there to basically assist workers. But what is very often neglected is that employment regulation is much more than that. Employment regulation in the first place is a tool that the legal system gives to employer in order for them to be able to issue orders, directives that are binding over their workers, so the workers don't have the possibility to question those directives and orders if they are if they are reasonable and non-arbitrary and not unlawful. And therefore, as Antonio was explaining with the anecdote of Giovanni Gaia, it was good for Gaia to hire people as employees because he could then tell them what to do with the production. At the same time, since all these great powers are created and vested into employers, the legal system reacts to this creation of powers on the side of employers by giving protection to workers. So workers' protection is a reaction, is not the origin of labor law, is the reaction of the legal system to the creation of large powers on the side of employers. So employers have very great powers, and also they have the responsibility to grant some social protection to workers. Now, the problem is that this sort of trade-off between protection on the one hand and direction and control and hierarchy has been basically challenged by many of the modern practice in business. And it's not just about platforms, but we see many other business adopting this model in which basically they try to retain control, hierarchy, direction, without paying the social protection cost, without paying the cost of affording protection over the workers and to the workers. And this is where the problems start, because this is a way to save, of course, money, and of course, businesses, all businesses aim at saving money, but this way of saving money makes the rest of society, workers, but also societies more at large, bear the costs of the production that the employers are shedding away.
Yes, I agree, of course. And I would also like to stress that this also is somehow problematic in terms of business efficiency, because this some kind of puzzling confusion between strong managerial prerogatives and diluted responsibilities may apparently looks like a huge opportunity in terms of, let's say, taking advantage of these kind of business design. This can be seen as a win-win option, because even without owning resources, both physical assets, but also labor energies, as we call them, companies are able to save money. Now, this has been challenged on two main grounds. The first one is that there is a rather problematic contradiction between the exercise of power and the absence of the relevant protective duties. And this is not our opinion. The Court of Justice of the European Union, when analyzing the Uber-Pop business model, claim that the degree of control over drivers, including the possibility of excluding drivers from the platform, was comparable to the kind of control that we can find in the employment relationship. The goal of the ruling was not about deciding whether there was or not an employment relationship, but actually the focus of control can be somehow helpful for labor lawyers. And there are some critical features of platform work that, of course, are spreading much beyond the platform economic environment, as Valerio said. And this is a kind of laboratory in terms of experimentation of what we call people analytics, but also management by algorithms. And this is also connected to some other trends that are reshaping the labor market. So the platform economy, we would say, was not designed in a day. There are some other important phenomena, such as the vertical disintegration of the firm, that is the possibility of outsourcing some functions of the company to external providers. And another crucial phenomenon that has been described, that is the fissurization of the workplace. Again, bringing some core competencies from the core business, not only to the periphery of the company, but to the external area of the company. Now, for those that are also interested in building a company that is successful, this can be rather problematic. And maybe when it comes to understanding the role of technology, we should pay attention on these kind of risk and also opportunities. I guess that the platform economy and also the forms of employment that are dispatched through apps or by means of platform are now very famous in a way. So we're going to skip the focus on the operation of the platform just in order to discuss a bit more the so-called efficiency enhancing dimension. This is important in my opinion because according to many studies that have been also conducted by labor economists, not necessarily labor lawyers, we can find a positive relationship between strategic flexibility, innovation, and also dynamism. Why so? Because legal certainty and in general labor market institutions, including the collective bargaining mechanism, are also a way to uphold innovation and to support efficiency for two main reasons. The first one is connected to the creation of the so-called level playing field, a space where partners, competitors, and stakeholders in general can test and try new experimentation while protecting the outcome of this exercise. The second issue that we're going to discuss a bit more is the role of labor institution and social institution in terms of being an agent that is aimed at lowering transaction cost by affording greater flexibility. And this is crucial for designing a company that is able to grow. Actually, we rely on a very long-lasting analysis that has been described and conceptualized for the very first time by Ronald Coase. Let's say that there are three alternative strategies for a company. When it comes to deciding how to produce both physical assets and items or even digital services, a company can decide to make them internally by defining what is called the hierarchy, or it could be possible to obtain them thanks to commercial transaction in the market. There is also another opportunity that is building a kind of network that is based on the interdependence and cooperation among players, as it happens in the model of district. Now, the crucial element of this analysis is that there is a sort of overlapping between the hierarchy, the vertical firm, and the employment relationship, the contract of employment, while on the other side, there is a sort of correlation between the model of the market and the model of self-employment. This is rather important for two important reasons that Valerio has introduced. The first one is related to the managerial prerogative. In this specific area, in the zone of acceptance, actually this unique platform that is the relationship between two private parties, the employer and the employee. Even if we are in this sort of relationship, that is a private relationship, one of the two parties, namely the employer, has a command and control position, a rather strong authority that can be also divided for academic purposes in three main powers. But this is important because there is a sort of trade-off. In exchange for security, stability, the employer is entitled to organize the performance, to control the results, and even to sanction the non-compliant behaviors. This cannot happen in the other model, in the model of self-employment. Of course, we are well aware, and Valerio wrote a doctoral dissertation on this, that there can be some non-legal tools that can be used also in the model of self-employment in order to issue orders and to define a sort of unbalanced relationship. But in theory, the employment relationship is a space where forces are in equilibrium between security and flexibility, thanks to this unique tool that is responsible for the development of the modern enterprise. And this is another important issue that we would like to underline. The first point is that, as was discussed before, we are dealing with a rather distorted notion of flexibility. If we had to analyze the model of governance, actually we would end up understanding that many new players in the platform economy want to have it both ways because they are exercising powers while avoiding the responsibilities. But then there is another important mainstream approach that is totally wrong, as Valerio said before. And this conventional wisdom tries to claim the contradiction between the contract of employment and flexibility. And the argument is the following one. If we classify workers as employees, they are going to lose the flexibility that they like and enjoy while working as self-employed workers. This is flawed and wrong for a set of reasons, but let's say that, as we discuss now, the contract of employment has an embedded flexibility that is very important also for new companies. But now there is another important issue, and I guess that Valerio can also add something on this. Some other commentators, also in good faith, are claiming that the employment contract or even the employment relationship is under-inclusive because too many workers nowadays are left outside the protective scope of labor law. This is due to a sort of deregulation trend, or also to the encouragement towards new atypical forms of work that are somehow divergent from the model of the standard employment relationship. There is another point that I would like to make that is about a common misunderstanding and the rather negative effects of these misunderstandings. So very often the employment relationship is associated with the industrial model of production. So the contract of employment is no more and no longer viable because the manufacturing sector, the industrial sector has collapsed. Now, we answer that this is not true because the first beneficiaries of labor law have nothing to do with the large manufacturing, the large factory, where some systems of scientific management were in place. The second issue is that the contract of employment is an instrumental, a technical device that is not related to tight control, pervasive directives, stringent orders. It is based on the exchange between protective duties and managerial prerogatives. Whatever the means is used to exercise that kind of authority and power. This is rather important because many current commentators are using this very flawed argument to claim the obsolescence of the employment relationship. First point, the employment relationship is not related to the factory, to the system of production that was in force in the 19th century. Second point, it is a merely functional and instrumental device that is not related to a specific way in which the power is exercised. I would say that the authority in the context of the employment relationship is neutral, whatever the means, digital or analog. And I don't know if Valerio would like to add something on the narrow scope, on the alleged narrow scope of the employment relationship. You should turn on your microphone, Valerio.
So the first thing I wanted to add to anything that Antonio has said is when we talk about this flexibility, one of the things that can get misperceived is that sometimes people argue that if workers get protection, they cannot retain flexible schedules, which is something that many of them appreciate. They don't want to be tied to fixed working hours. And the argument goes that they will lose this flexibility if they are protected. Now, this is an argument that we argue in many cases is flawed for a number of reasons. First of all, there is no contradiction between employment and flexibility. So platforms can still provide flexibility of working time even if employment protection is guaranteed. And they are actually in the very good position of doing that because their algorithms allow them to provide, to foresee when people are going to be in and out for shifts and available for jobs. So it's very easy for them to organize the shifts and jobs in a way that people don't lose protection even if they retain flexible working time. This is one thing. And the other thing, very importantly, is that this flexibility of working time is sometimes misconceived by courts that interpret this as a way of, as an indicator that an employment relationship cannot be there. Now, this was the case at the beginning in many courts around Europe, in many countries. The Supreme Courts or the tribunals would say that it wasn't possible to classify platform workers as employees because they were flexible. But more and more courts are shifting away from that because they see that even when people are flexible to log in and off the application during their work shifts, they are so much subject to managerial prerogatives, to control, to direction from the platforms that it makes no sense to speak about self-employment and to deny them fundamental protection. And one of the things that we argued in our past writings is that it doesn't make sense to tie protections for such as the right to bargain collectively, the right to join a union, or the right to minimum wage or working time protection only to flexibility of working time. This was an indicator that was useful when the working day was much more fixed for everyone. At the moment, in a moment in which technologies allow every one of us to be much more fluid in how we take care and work and fulfill our employment obligations, it doesn't make sense to deny protection to the people who have no rigid schedules. Also, until when we know how the algorithms work, and until when we know that the algorithms don't penalize people that have an unstable schedule, we won't be able to say for sure that this flexibility is genuine, is true. It is true that that there is no boss, there is not physical supervisor that tells you off if you don't show up on time or you don't take their shifts that the platform would want them to would want workers to take. But at the same time, we don't know if the algorithm penalizes you if you don't provide for a stable workflow. So flexibility is something to question also when allegedly is there. And at the same time, one of the other things that we also argue is that the lack of employment protection is not a problem only for workers, but it's also a problem for society at large. And we have seen that in the current crisis, with many workers being forced to go and work because they had no choice between working and starvation. And many of them went to work even if they were sick or even if they weren't feeling well. And this puts at risk not only them, but also societies more at large. And this is a very important issue. And another important issue, as Antonio was mentioning, is how can we ensure that all workers that need protection are protected? And it's true that when we are talking about the traditional definition of employment, some vulnerable workers are left out. Now, we argue that a more sensible and reasonable reading of employment and the notion of employment would encompass more worker and would provide more protection. But at the same time, we cannot hide the fact that some people will not be classified as employees even if we adopt a wider notion of employment, a more general notion of employment. This is why, with other colleagues, I in particular have argued on the basis of the works of Professor Mark Friedland and Professor Nicola Contouris from Oxford University and University College of London, that we should expand protection beyond the realm of employment relationship to cover everyone who provides work on a personal basis with no use of substitutes or of material capital or material or immaterial goods. And this is something that we definitely can reflect upon, but it's very important to always notice that employment per se, it is not something that has been abandoned when it comes to hierarchy and control. Hierarchy and control are still there and are spreading beyond the traditional scope of employment. And this is why we need to expand protection beyond this traditional scope.
Yes, I would like to build on this very final statement, that is the fact that the strong managerial prerogatives in terms of organization and control are now decoupled from the protective duties. And in particular, another issue that we mentioned in the article is that the employment relationship is also designed or even built on a system that we could define as a structural ambivalence for this following reason. As we said before, the crucial function of the employment relationship is to enable the managerial prerogatives that are organization, control, and even discipline. That is a rather strong power, the possibility of sanctioning the employees that are not compliant. But there is another important dimension of this social platform, just to use the buzzword. That is the role of the legal framework, but also the role played by social partners in rationalizing and even humanizing the latitude of this power. This is why we said that the employment relationship is a space where forces are in equilibrium, because at the same time, the strong prerogatives are enabled, but they are also limited or at least made consistent with the principles and values that we can find in the Constitution. So, final words on this, and by way of conclusion, we would like to stress this very point of view, which is also what we call the recipe for success. We have a current problem: the abuse of forms of employment that are not consistent with the employment relationship results in lower productivity growth, according to many evidences that can be found in different studies. For two main reasons: because this model reduce and disempower the development of skills and decouple managerial power from the protective duties. So, what is the conclusion? The first one: classifying workers as employees does not entail a loss of flexibility for businesses and managers. At the same time, some non-standard forms of employment are non-efficient in terms of business organization and even flexible, innovative organization, because they end up misaligning interest. And the embedded flexibility, of course, is crucial for success, all the more so in a constantly changing labor market, when firms need to adapt to the shifting demands of the customer base. This is crucial. At the moment, this is somehow neglected in the dominant, let's say, and widespread understanding of the digital revolution. So, to conclude on this, before discussing with you the points that have been shared on the chat, this is the lesson that we can learn from the story of the Gaia family, in particular, thanks to the crazy decision taken by Giovanni, the founder of the company. Innovation can be at ease with strong social institution, and innovation can be supported by these templates as long as safeguards are put in place. The other issue that maybe we should discuss about is how to make employment convenient for both employers and employees by reducing tax burden or making red tape easier for those that are involved in this situation. But please, let's take into account that circumventing labor law is not beneficial for those who are willing to design a business that is not only disruptive, but also efficient and innovative, according to the analysis that we carried out in this article. Thank you very much. I guess that we have almost 10 questions, so I don't know if you, Valerio, are able to look at the chat. But there is one point about the universal basic income, and I don't know if you want to address that.
Sure.
Please.
Yes. I can start that also because at 8 I will have to I will have to leave. The universal basic income is a proposal that has been around for some time now. Before this digital revolution occurred, and before we were all worried about mass unemployment because of automation. And but it has been, of course, brought more to the front because of these issues. There are people that say that we should adopt the UBI, the Universal Basic Income, to take care of the increasing challenges that these phenomena bring us. Now, of course, one has to take into account the Universal Basic Income to be functioning will cost enormously. And for the moment, even their proponents admit that it's not a solution in the short term. But in the long term, in the medium long term, I think that one of the things that we should do, and we can start doing right now, and actually the crisis is an occasion, an opportunity for doing that, is to start removing the conditionalities that weigh on people that get unemployment benefits and social welfare and social and welfare benefits more in general. These conditionalities were conceived in an era in which most of the people would get a job that was secure, was stable, and was long-term. In a moment in which many of the jobs that are out there are instead precarious and insecure, forcing people into employment using conditionalities only worsen the situation of workers and also worsen the situation of the worker, of the labor market more at large, because people are forced to accept jobs that are under standard, and under standard work is not a problem only for workers, it's a problem for society, because it also undermines productivity of firms. Firms don't have an incentive to get better, to invest in better production, in better technologies, if they can use cheap labor. So definitely, we will have to move in a direction in which our welfare systems, our unemployment benefits, don't force people into work that is not of a good condition. And slowly, through that, we can go in the direction of more universal social protection. That is something that I think in the medium long term, we will have to absolutely get to.
There are many interesting points in the chat. I'm going to address the issue, two issues that are somehow related. There is a point on self-employment and some constraints that are used in order to exercise a certain degree of power even over self-employed workers. Now, very often these tends to be a rather abusive practice because, again, according to the original model, self-employment is based on autonomy, discretion. So all the elements and the incentives that are created in order to basically replace this autonomy with a more stringent and pervasive relationship are the clear manifestation of the problem that we are currently seeing in the platform economy. And very often, the employment relationship is not avoided because it is seen as non-efficient. The crucial goal and the overarching aim for avoiding the employment relationship is to get rid of the costs that are related to the employment relationship. And this is somehow problematic also in terms of fair competition, because it's rather easy, I would say, to build a business whose main competitive advantage is based on misapplication of labor law. So we are trying also to map this kind of spreading of managerial prerogatives beyond the employment relationship. And then there is a point about portable benefits that is somehow connected to self-employment. I'm in theory in favor of portable benefits, provided that they are seen as tools for emancipation and not as a way to tie the provider to the client. This is very often happening in the platform economy, but also in other systems, by issuing exclusivity clause, by adding some very carefully drafted clauses in the contracts, in the terms and conditions. The result is the so-called lock-in effect. This is mainly due to the internal design of a platform, for instance, the fact that the worker has an internal reputation, an internal rating, a ranking, and very worryingly, these incentives, these nudge, but also this system that is somehow based on gamification, ends up linking the worker to the platform, because it can be very hard to rebuild the position in the ranking by switching from a platform to another one. So the answer is positive when it comes to assessing the role of portable benefits, provided that they are authentic and they are empowering emancipation instead of deepening hierarchy and control. Then there is another consideration about the countries where informality is the norm, and maybe Valerio, that used to work at the International Labour Organization, can address this issue. So the question is about how can, let's say, how can we implement and enforce the employment relationship in those countries where informality is on the rise? From my point of view, I would say that this is also standard in the development of the employment relationship, because at the beginning of labor law, the workforce was highly fragmented, destandardized, informal. The development of the company that is somehow parallel to the development of a formal economy needed also the formalization of the employment relationship and the standardization, that is the creation of rules, duties, and protection. But I don't know if Valerio would like to add something on this.
Yeah, so two things before going. The first one, when it comes to informality and countries with a high level of informality, we should not forget that platform work and the misclassification of people into self-employment is a form of informality, because it derives under declaration of for tax purposes or social security purposes, or even no declaration. So we risk driving informality up even in sectors in which the presence of multinationals, the presence of structured corporations normally will guarantee that at least the work relationship would be in a way or another formalized. So platform work in many cases is a form of informality. It's under, this aspect is under researched and it's often neglected, but this is definitely a problem, especially for developing countries that don't need at all any more informality from people, from corporations that could afford to basically hire people under formal arrangements. And this is one of the things. And then there's another question that I find very interesting about how these models will affect the work of HR departments. And I think one of the possible idea and one of the things that we are seeing is that basically using technology to direct and control workers also reduces the need of HR, because you use the algorithms to do the job that normally would be made by HR people. So when we talk about technology and automation, we should not only think that the people that we are going to lose the jobs are the people who we normally think are going to lose the job. So the one in low-skilled occupation, the one in manual occupation, actually many clerical occupation, and actually arguably when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence, more clerical occupation will be affected than manual occupation. So this is something that definitely has an impact on HR and on actually the way the HR will work, because we will see HR departments shrink in the future because their functions will be carried out through technology. And we already are seeing this at the moment.
Yes, there is another point here, of course, on the redesign of social security. I guess that maybe some more energy should be devoted to addressing this issue in terms of, as I said before, fiscal and tax burden instead of avoiding the cost of employment. And the other point that is about the let's say, lawsuit and also the litigation in which many new digital companies are embroiled. This is very important, and this is also a way to boost the argument that we have made in this conversation. Building a business model that is taking advantage of legal loopholes, or at the same time is trying to avoid the rules, is vulnerable from a legal perspective, and as a result this makes company prone to be basically challenged in courts. And this is happening all over the world. It's almost impossible to keep track of the outcomes, but also the number of litigation that is at the moment active all over the world. I guess that if there are no other questions, we can thank you here, and of course we can give a round of virtual applause to Valerio that has to lead the conversation. It has been a real pleasure. I was considering to invite him as a guest lecturer, but of course there is a global pandemic going on that is preventing us for having a beer in Montagna at the moment. But this is a sort of substitute that of course is not as good as the original plan.
Well, thanks so much. It was really a pleasure to be with you, and I really look forward to accepting the invitation and come to Madrid in person to visit you and the IE. Thanks so much. And
thank you, Valerio.
Thank you,
Thank you, Valerio. Thank you, Antonio, very much.
Thank you, Valerio.
It was a really interesting conversation. And people were connected all the time, so it was fantastic. I have to remind everybody that you can all check the recording in the link that was shared, the website for Reading Complex Times, and of course a pleasure. Valerio will be waiting for you in Madrid, of course. I hope sooner than later.
Now you have a double invitation.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly, Antonio, and I have to meet you face to face as well.
Thank you
very
much.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Thanks so
Let's
much.
keep in touch. Thank you everybody for being connected. Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
Bye. Same to you.
Guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.